Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 347 of the podcast. And on this episode, I'm talking about Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin. The Pittsburgh Steelers were eliminated in the NFL playoffs by the rival Ravens by a score of 28-14. And what has become almost like a yearly tradition, the media is starting to talk about Mike Tomlin's future with the organization and ponder if they should move on from the Super Bowl winning coach. And the argument this year has been the fact that Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game in 8 years. I, to a certain degree, understand this reaction. These pundits are fixated on playoff results, but in the NFL, it's about consistently making the dance, and almost no one is better at that than Mike Tomlin. He's made the playoffs 12 times, has won a Super Bowl, and been to another. In my opinion, I don't even think about firing a coach until a team becomes bad. So let's say the Steelers do move on from Tomlin. That puts an insane amount of pressure on whoever would take over the position. And this idea that there's anyone who can do a job better with the Steelers than Mike Tomlin is completely insane. And I listened to NFL Network's Kyle Brandt when he said that the Steelers are a legacy team that needs to do more than just make the playoffs. But he also brought up the fact that every other team would want Tomlin. He's right, but he didn't get into why that is, because Tomlin, if you compare him to other coaches in the NFL, is leagues above these guys. Not only is he great on the field, he's brilliant in the way that he's become the absolute face of that organization and how he deals with the media overall. I also just think he did a fantastic job this season. He got a really good season out of Russell Wilson, a guy who many people, including Kyle Brandt himself, called washed up. And one thing I think all of these media personalities are missing out on is I think the Steelers now need Mike Tomlin more than Mike Tomlin needs the Pittsburgh Steelers. You hear all the chatter about how the Chicago Bears requested an interview with Mike Tomlin. All of the up-and-coming teams want this guy as their head coach because he makes your organization interesting and he makes them consistent, which is everything the Steelers want to be. That's why they won't let this guy go. And I am just also not a believer in this idea that an organization absolutely has to bottom out before they can get back on top. I believe in being consistent, and that's what Mike Tomlin is as a head coach. He's uber consistent. It's also like, what really were your expectations for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year? No one thought they were a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They went into this season with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and Mike Tomlin was able to get them to a postseason appearance. And I'm someone who values making the postseason over and over again. That's how you eventually get over the hump. You don't all of a sudden go, oh, I'm not happy we made it to the first round of the playoffs. Let's bottom out. That is not a smart philosophy. This is another thing I hear all of the time when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, that they are in the absolute worst position to be in all of sports, that they are a middling franchise. No, a middling franchise is a team that always wins 7 to 8 games. They're not making the playoffs and they're not relevant. Everyone still talks about the Pittsburgh Steelers on a weekly basis for two reasons. One, because they're always a decent football team with a chance to make the playoffs, and two, because Mike Tomlin is the head coach of that team and he's the most interesting figure on that team. Yes, it's fair to say that maybe your most popular figure should not be the head coach, that it should be a player, but that's not Mike Tomlin's fault to me. He is doing his absolute best job right now as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Instead of talking about the Steelers needing to replace their head coach, we should be talking about the fact that they need to find that next franchise quarterback because they really haven't found somebody to replace Big Ben Roethlisberger. It hasn't happened happened yet, and it needs to happen soon if they're going to go back to being a Super Bowl contending team. The Steelers' season to me played out exactly like I thought it was going to. I thought Mike Tomlin was going to get a very good season out of Russell Wilson, that they would be a playoff team, and they wouldn't go very far, and that's exactly how things played out. So why would I fire Mike Tomlin for things playing out the way I expected them to? I am one of those people who admire the Steelers for standing by coaches they believe in. Yes, it's easy to stick by Chuck Noll after he wins 4 Super Bowls, but Bill Cowher 3 years in a row missed the playoffs, and in his last season, he finally won a Super Bowl. Tomlin is not in a rough patch anyway, and the team rightfully knows things would spiral if they get rid of a top 3 coach in the league. He's getting the absolute best out of the roster. He's not holding them back whatsoever. What I respect about the Pittsburgh Steelers right now is I believe they are self-aware as an organization. They don't think they should have multiple Super Bowl championships over the last 8 years. They know that Mike Tomlin is probably overperforming within the organization right now, not underperforming like so many are making it out to be. It's not easy to coach a team when a franchise quarterback retires. Look what happened to Bill Belichick after Tom Brady retired. He did not have a winning season. Mike Tomlin has been to the playoffs without Big Ben. He just went there with Russell Wilson, and he lost to a player that many people believe is the absolute best quarterback in the NFL. Where is the shame in that? I also just think it's so silly how some of these media personalities talk about these franchises, like the Yankees, the Steelers, the Cowboys, the 49ers, that each and every year they should walk away winning a Super Bowl or a World Series or the NBA Finals. Like, that's not how sports works. You don't each and every year win the big one. It's not going to happen for you. Mike Tomlin is not someone who is coasting off of the fact that he's only won 1 Super Bowl. I mean, he's been super consistent. He's thought of as one of the best coaches in all of football. Who exactly do you want to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers? Who would make that a better franchise? The other thing about this that absolutely no one is talking about is the Steelers are one of those teams that have a philosophy. They build their teams through the draft. They are not heavy spenders in the offseason in the way that many other teams are. They're more like the Packers. They're not going to go out and sign a high-priced running back. They develop young talent, and there's no one better at doing that than Tomlin. The highest priced free agent in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers is a linebacker named Patrick Queen, who signed for 3 years, $41 million. You don't build teams through free agency, but you can fill holes, and that doesn't seem to interest the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the room for growth for them as a team is limited when it comes to the roster itself. Just look at the talented amount of wide receivers who have had their absolute best seasons under Mike Tomlin. He knows what to do with talent when he has a lot of talent on the roster. I think the problem is the Steelers are one of those teams that don't do a lot during the offseason. And part of that is because they know that Mike Tomlin is going to get the absolute best out of the roster no matter what. I think they are taking him for granted, and he's the one who's taking the hits because the team's not getting over the hump. So we look at the head coach and we go, wow, the Steelers haven't won a playoff game in 8 years. Guess whose fault that is Mike Tomlin's. But then you look at their offseason the past 8 years. What have they done that's so exciting to get them over the hump? What talent have they brought in? What star wide receiver have they brought in to play with their talented roster? Yes, they develop guys like George Pickens, but it goes no further than that. I believe things would get far worse for the Pittsburgh Steelers than get better if they were to let Mike Tomlin Tomlin go because they would be a directionless franchise. I don't think the philosophy about the organization would change. It's not like the Rooneys would all of a sudden spend a boatload of money on a free agent quarterback to come in. That's what the Steelers have to do. They need to draft their next young and upcoming quarterback because the team's not going to spend any money on one. While I don't agree with this idea that it would be better for both sides if Mike Tomlin were to leave the organization, I do believe that it would be better for Tomlin to go than the team. I mean, Mike Tomlin is someone who I think could have won a lot of games if he were coaching Caleb Williams in the NFL right now. I think he could be winning a lot of games in a lot of different places with talented quarterbacks. But he's left with Russell Wilson, who is still very good, but he's no longer an elite level playmaker like he used to be. He's no longer that guy who won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. This is the thing that irks me the most about this situation, is the fact that I believe that if Mike Tomlin won that football game with Russell Wilson over Lamar Jackson, I believe all of the people calling for his job would have, on Monday or whatever day after, would have gone on television and said that Mike Tomlin is the best coach in the league, that he was able to win a playoff game with Russell Wilson, that he would have gotten overpraised for winning that game. I don't believe you should be judging head coaches game to game. I think you should do it season to season and ask yourselves truthfully, what were you expecting from this organization this past season? I don't believe anybody was expecting the Pittsburgh Steelers to win a lot of playoff football games this year. I would be judging Mike Tomlin more harshly if I believed he had a stacked roster that he was losing games with. Yes, there are some nice players on the Pittsburgh Steelers. TJ Watt is a great defensive player. George Pickens is an impressive talent, but that team is not all that impressive to me. This is how highly I believe in Mike Tomlin. I believe if Mike Tomlin were coaching the Cincinnati Bengals, who missed the playoffs, they could win a Super Bowl. I mean, give him Joe Burrow, give him Jamar Chase, give him that offense, and Mike Tomlin is winning a lot of football games, and that team is a way better defensive team. Give Mike Tomlin talent, and he can definitely win a Super Bowl, because I think he is overachieving right now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just don't buy into this idea that they're no longer the Pittsburgh Steelers of old. Oh, they can't even run the ball. They can't play elite defense. Nobody is running the ball in today's NFL. Nobody is playing elite defense. That's not today's NFL. That's yesteryear. Move on. Mike Tomlin is dealing with the new NFL in a way that I think is very productive. Another thing about Mike Tomlin that hasn't been talked about enough is the fact that the man is only 52 years old and he's been coaching in the NFL since 2007. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers could really get another great 15 years of Mike Tomlin as a head coach. I believe he's that good of a coach where he deserves another decade with the Steelers until things really fall apart for the organization. I don't believe that the Steelers as an organization have put Mike Tomlin in a great position to win a lot of playoff games over the last 8 years. Again, the highest price free agent in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers is $41 million. There are super talented players making more than that in a single season in today's NFL. It's hard to compete in a world like that when you're not willing to spend a lot of money on talent. And I do get the argument that the Pittsburgh Steelers might never get their next franchise quarterback until they bottom out. But guess what I'm saying? If they were to bottom out, I would want it to be with Mike Tomlin as the head coach. I would want Mike Tomlin to be the head coach of the next franchise quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I believe there's no one else who's going to get the most out of a young franchise quarterback who's the number one overall pick in the NFL per se. There's only one head coach in the league who I believe right now is definitively better than Mike Tomlin, and that's Andy Reid, who's winning a lot of Super Bowls with Patrick Mahomes. Do I believe that Mike Tomlin could win a lot of Super Bowls with Patrick Mahomes? Absolutely. Mike Tomlin is in that reign of head coaches like a Sean McVay, like Kyle Shanahan, who I want to be the long-term coaches of my organizations. Take Kyle Shanahan, for example. He had a rough year this year. The 49ers were not a good team Would I think about moving on from Kyle Shanahan? Absolutely not. He's been to 2 Super Bowls with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. And McVay is having one of the best seasons he's ever had as a head coach. I just believe coaches go through ups and downs. It's not always great. I always bring up Eric Spoelstra and Steve Kerr in the NBA for examples. Those are guys who had great success early on. Eric Spoelstra was coaching LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. They went to the NBA Finals 4 years in a row, and then those superstars broke up, and they went through a rough patch. But Eric Spoelstra today is now viewed as one of the best coaches in the league. Steve Kerr early on was winning with the Warriors. Then Kevin Durant left, and he was able to bounce back and win a title without Kevin Durant. If you believe you have the right coach in any sport, you should stick by that guy if you believe in him to be a part of your future long term. It doesn't always have to be about the short term. Yes, when you say things like Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game in 8 years, it doesn't sound great. But you know what also does sound pretty good? Making the playoffs year in and year out, not having a losing record, and always putting an entertaining product out on the field. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers are always interesting and are always an entertaining product. They are always an interesting football team to watch. It's also just very dangerous to be grading Mike Tomlin against his own past. Well, this is a guy who's won a Super Bowl, and he's coaching the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that was a dynasty in the 1970s. I think that's a dangerous game to play, saying that Mike Tomlin should be having that success just because they're the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I'm a Patriots fan, and I hear it all the time. Oh, the Patriots need to get back to their winning ways. Well, why is that? Just because they're the New England Patriots, they need to win a lot of football games? It doesn't work like that. Like, you gotta have the right guy. And Mike Tomlin is a great head coach and should not be viewed as part of the problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but as part of the solution. I'm not naive. I don't even know if all these people calling for Mike Tomlin to lose his job actually believe he should lose his job, or they're just trying to say something for entertainment purposes. All I know is that I believe Mike Tomlin is a top 2 head coach in the NFL, if not the best head coach in the NFL. I believe he could be winning in any opportunity he's in. And Steeler fans should not take him for granted. The fact that you have a head coach who gets you to the playoffs year in and year out, and a guy who has never had a losing record. Do you know how painful it is to watch a very bad football team? I have experienced it over the last few years, watching the New England Patriots go through a lot of losing, and they may continue to lose a lot of football games because they don't have as good a head coach as Mike Tomlin, who can win football games at a consistent level no matter the talent he's been given by the front office. NFL coaches should lose their jobs when they don't make the playoffs with great talent on the roster, not when they are making the playoffs with lackluster talent. And that's what I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers roster is consistent of. They're not that great of a roster. Yes, they have the big names in TJ Watt. They have George Pickens, who hasn't proven himself to be super elite just yet. Mike Tomlin was winning regular season football games this year with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. You know who wasn't winning regular season games with those 2 quarterbacks? The Chicago Bears and the Denver Broncos. Sean Payton, who I believe is a very good head coach, was not able to get good football out of Russell Wilson. Now, I did not like how Sean Payton treated Russell Wilson, but Sean Payton wasn't winning games with Russell Wilson at a high rate, the rate that Mike Tomlin was. Mike Tomlin is a better head coach than Sean Payton, and better than all but one other head coach in the league, and that's Andy Reid. The people who have said that the Steelers should move on from Tomlin have not given a reason why, except for saying things like, well, the Steelers haven't won a playoff game in 8 years. And I haven't heard from any of them who they believe should be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The truth is, there is no better solution as to who should be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the organization seems to understand that more than anyone else. Like, they are telling you how you should feel about Mike Tomlin, and that's why I feel so strongly about Mike Tomlin, because if the team doesn't think that Mike Tomlin is the problem, then clearly Mike Tomlin is not the problem. He is the thing keeping the Steelers relevant and afloat. I just think he's gotten to a point where he deserves more than when they lose a playoff game, we immediately talk about him losing his job or moving to another team. Yes, it's an interesting conversation to have. A lot of teams would be better with Mike Tomlin, but the fact of the matter is the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a lot worse without Mike Tomlin. He is the most interesting figure in the franchise. He's the only reason these people are talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers in the first place. So to want that guy to leave that organization is just bonkers to me. He's a Hall of Fame coach, and I hope he coaches his entire career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.